such a time as this.
And welcome to For Such a Time as This. This is our weekend wrap-up. As you can notice, it's a little late. Vacations push some things back. Okay, this topic on this weekend roundup, we're going to use as the basis an article written by Don Vino, who is the president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. The article was entitled Fraternity over Orthodoxy, and he explains why did he write this article. Let me just get into it. I'll say some quotes, then I'll turn it over again to Professor Abby.
Hello.
And Professor Chris.
Hello.
All right, I'll get this article started. Don Vino writes, after I spoke at a church this past weekend, I was asked, how is it that so many celebrity preachers, celebrity Christian authors, and celebrity pastors take the stage with known and popular false teachers? That must have been a very, very smart church he spoke at this weekend that spurred on such an article. As a church by the name of New Hope Community Church in Palatine, Illinois. Very, very influential church in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. But anyway, I'll go on in the article. There are, of course, many possible reasons, Don writes. It could be they seek to maintain or add to their own personal popularity. It may boast their ego to speak to large crowds of 20 to 50,000. Or it may boost their personal wealth when they can sell books well into the 7-digit range. Another reason is most likely because of personal friendship between pastor and celebrity. Thus the title Fraternity over Orthodoxy. Later on in the article he writes this, and this is the heart of it, as he gives an example. I have a friend, Don writes, a pastor whom I care about deeply. He has been a faithful leader, solid Bible teacher, and servant of the Lord for a very long time. Sadly, though, I have noticed some issues in the last couple of years concerning who is invited to speak in the pulpit when he is absent. When I first was made aware of the questionable guest speaker, I wanted to let it go by. But I had a problem. Proverbs 6 kept haunting me. Proverbs 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Profuse. He goes on, do I care enough about truth or about him to speak up? Or should I just look the other way for fear of offending my friend and perhaps even losing his friendship? It is true that we can overlook many flaws in our friends, such as their egregious choices of ties or chronic lateness, for example. But there are truths that are much too important to compromise. I emailed him and I noted a bit of a chill in his response. The speaker, it turned out, is a friend and seminary professor of one of the church staff. There is the fraternity, Inc. He goes on and he says that the friend asked a question and then the friend has not returned his emails. And so it seems as though the friend got upset when confronted about letting the heretic into his pulpit, and thus it seems as though Don and his friend suffered as a result. Professor Abby, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, you know what? Unfortunately, this is nothing new, and I've scratched my head for a very long time, wondering. Like, for instance, I don't know, was it 10 or 15 years ago when Brian McLaren came to speak at Willow Creek, and Brian McLaren denies the atonement. That is the gospel. Yeah. I mean, there is no gospel without the atonement. And I could not understand, and a lot has come out about Pastor Heibel since then.
I think we understand now, but go ahead.
Yes, but at the time, I could not understand why on earth he would bring in someone who denies the atonement.
No.
And I actually shared that with a friend of mine who went to Willow Creek, and I pretty much had the same experiences as Don, where, she just basically ended the conversation.
Wow.
And I was so shocked because it's the gospel. I mean, I didn't know anything more important to get right than the gospel. And how could you attend a church where the pastor is bringing in heretics? And I still scratch my head and go, what was my friend thinking? We know now that Bill Hybels is
He lived far out there himself.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But my friend, who always seemed like a solid Christian to me.
Why would a Christian not want to hear that false teaching is being influential in their church?
Ask the question again.
Why would a Christian not want to know or not want to deal with the fact that false teaching is being influenced, is having influence in their church?
Simple. When you're in a church with a pastor who brings somebody in, you trust that pastor is doing what's right for the flock. And it becomes very difficult to question a pastor, especially lead pastor, especially someone like Bill Hybels, who has made millions and is a shepherd to, at least at the time, thousands, tens of thousands of people. It can be very intimidating. Before we came to New Hope, there was a pastor, a church that we had attended, where they brought in a young man to preach in front of the flock and told a story of his youth group walking on water out in the Pacific Ocean.
Whoa. A movie they saw?
Oh, boy.
4 or 5 days ago. Or, I'm sorry, 4 or 5 years ago.
He actually did it, okay.
He claims that kids in his youth group walked on water on the ocean.
Yikes.
Wonderful.
When I called the pastor the next day, I said, I kind of have a problem with this. We need to talk about it. Do you believe that that's true? And his answer was a little guarded and, well, I believe God could do that. And I said, okay, well, I'm not questioning that God couldn't do that, but
correct.
It seems that that's not what God has wanting us to do now. That Peter walking on water with Jesus was for his very specific purpose, to teach us that we don't have enough faith, not to go out and walk on water because I want to. That's a very big difference between those two. And I said, do you believe that that's true? Do you believe what he said? Are you a charismatic? Is this church a charismatic church? Because this young man was very much a Benny Hinn follower. He called him his mentor. My. And I said, are we a charismatic church like that? And he said, no, we're not anywhere near that. And I said, so are you preparing a rebuttal to the things that you disagree with what this young man? I said, first, you shouldn't have had him in front of the flock. Second, I think you should have rebuttals for the church. So here's things that I disagree with him. And in the future, maybe think about having something after we have the service. Because the service is you as the pastor teaching and leading the flock, not presenting different points of view. Now, you can bring them up in a conversation, but not have somebody come in and spend the whole service telling us this thing. Because it gives the impression very strongly that you agree with them.
Correct.
Of course. So, if it stands uncorrected, and we've had this conversation here before, when something's done publicly, when there is public error, it needs to be publicly corrected.
Yeah.
If you've got a private error going on, then by all means go privately to your brother or your sister.
Yep.
But publicly, for the sake of the flock, error needs to be corrected.
And so we have this situation that is being very prominent in our culture, in the evangelical culture, in which it seems that very solid biblical teachers have no problem locking arms and sharing stages with those people who have clearly unorthodox views in the question that President Vino of the Midwest Christian Outreach tried to tackle is why? And he surmised, he came up with the answer that they are choosing friendship over truth. They are choosing that relationship they have with their friends over the Lord and the truth that is embodied in His Word. And one scripture I want to put up here that deals with this, it is Matthew 10:34. Do not think that I have come to bring peace on the earth, Jesus says. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A person's enemy will be those of his own household. Here it is, verse 37. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Jesus is saying if you put any earthly relationship over me, your God, then you are not worthy of me. And we're just talking about friends. And we see this over and over and over again. Parents who hold so-called parents hold to orthodox views about sexuality. A child comes out as homosexual, and the parents, for the sake of the child, changes their quote-unquote stated views of sexuality. That verse is very applicable even to that. He who loves his child more than me is not worthy of me. We're talking about friends. And if you have a friend that comes into your pulpit, or a friend that is walking in error, and you refuse to correct that friend, or you refuse to, especially if you're in a position of leadership, and you refuse to correct the error and choose the friendship over Christ,
right?
Christ has a very chilling message for you. You're not worthy of him. You're simply not worthy of him.
And there are unfortunately a number of presumably solid pastors and leaders. I mean, people that I personally really like. John MacArthur, Vodi Baucham, to name a couple. Ravi Zacharias, I mean, talk about some of the stuff he has written and spoken of. Eloquent, beautiful, profound defender of the Christian faith. But at the same time, they're doing conferences with and recommending people like Rick Warren and Joyce Meyer. And it's just so hard to understand. But I wanted to share this quote with you. This was, like I said, this is nothing new. It's been going on forever. But it's still kind of shocking, and it's very difficult to understand. But there was a guy who lived in the 1700s. His name was Philip Doddridge, and he was like the dean of an academy where most ministers were trained in the mid-1700s. And apparently, and he was written about by someone by the name of Schindler, who was Spurgeon's right-hand man. And Schindler said this: Schindler's judgment was that Doddridge's amiable disposition permitted him to do what men made of sterner stuff would not have done. He sometimes mingled in a fraternal manner, even exchanging pulpits with men whose orthodoxy was called into question. It had its effect on many of the younger men and served to lessen in the estimate of the people generally the growing divergence of sentiment. In other words, Schindler felt that Doddridge's tolerance of unorthodox teachers obscured from his ministerial students the awful reality that these men were guilty of serious error, and it left the students exposed to the deadly effects of their heresy. But, and here's the real shocking part, Schindler hastened to add, no one could, quote, insinuate even the suspicion of heresy against Doddridge himself. In other words, you have someone who appears to be 100% solid, bringing in heretics and apostates. And I have such a hard time understanding how that can be. How you can be solid and do that.
Yeah.
And we can't judge people's salvation.
Yeah, we can't.
But this is an awful practice. And this needs to be called out. It needs to stop because it does lead people astray. In fact, with this well, maybe we'll address it in a different at a different time. But
as we think about this, I just want to put this out there. It's not those who intellectually agree with Christianity that are saved. It's those who accept Christianity at a heart level. And what I mean by that, to put it plainly, it's for those who are willing to die for Christianity. It's those who have already died to self and taken on Christ. In short, if you're not willing to fight for it, is it in your heart? That's the question. And so you have someone, and all throughout history, you have people who held are verbally held to orthodox positions, but are you willing to do it? And there are scriptures, we've talked about this before, that if someone comes to you and they bring a different gospel, right? Paul called them anathema. John in his epistle, his second book, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. 2nd John says, you are not to greet them, you are not to have any fellowship with them.
And you can see now the wisdom in that.
Absolutely.
Because this is what happens.
Absolutely. Paul says in Corinthians, he says that what fellowship does light have with darkness? You are not to go hand in hand. You're not to rub elbows. You're not to share stages. If you look at 1 Corinthians 6, what fellowship does light have with darkness? It's a rhetorical question. 0. You cannot partner with those who bring a different gospel. You cannot do it. And if you do it, there's some serious questions about the person and the person's ministry.
And I think that God knows that if you do that, you're going to be exposed to some serious temptation to compromise.
Oh, yeah.
Which is exactly what we see happening. So he's just saying, you know what? Avoid this altogether.
Yep.
Just stay away.
Yep. And the desire to be liked and accepted by the world. I do believe that is so dangerous. That is so dangerous.
Yes.
I believe it will send people, unbeknownst to them, to a Christless eternity. You've got to be willing not only to believe it intellectually and verbally. Are we willing to die for this thing called the gospel? I think it's clear. You have to.
Well, I would include in that your good name. I can't think of what the other word to use for it.
Yes.
But your reputation.
You're lending credibility. You're not only destroying your own reputation, you're lending credibility to people who are enemies of the gospel.
Right. At the expense of your credibility, which can be an idol in this sense. They're putting this up on a pedestal as an idol, their credibility. Paul, we learned Paul, he had an incredible resume. When people started bragging about what they had done in the world, he said, no, you're nothing compared to me.
Rubbish.
But yet, I put all that aside and count it as worthless for what Christ has done for me. And that is the right perspective to things. It isn't me. I'm just as much of a sinner, and my credibility and my what you think of me isn't as important as your salvation. Because once I understood, read the New Testament, understood what the purpose of Christ coming to earth was for, not to be a good teacher, not to be a good guy who had good things to say, but literally to die on the cross to cover my sins when God judges. Wow, how humbling is that, right? Yeah. And so with these pastors, Don Vito's article refers to Acts 20:28. Be careful, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Yeah. And from among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things to draw away the disciples after them. Yeah. People will look for those who tickle their ears, not with sound doctrine what they want to hear. So, like you said, right off the bat, Professor Abby, it's nothing new. People want to hear what they want to hear. Well, I don't want to hear the bad stuff. I want to hear the good stuff that Christianity brings. Well, too bad. That's not how it works. If our master was tortured, was beaten and persecuted for us, we will forever boast and like Peter and John, relish or accept that, the being treated and what's the word I'm looking for?
Mistreated.
Persecution. And I wonder.
Persecution, thank you.
I wonder why these quote unquote solid pastors and leaders aren't afraid to do this.
Yeah. Abby, if these pastors are allowing wolves free access to their flock, they're not solid. And that's just simple. Believer, I don't know. That's between them and their God. But solid, absolutely not. If you're putting heretics in your pulpit, it is clear you are not a solid shepherd. A shepherd guards the flock. He doesn't open the gates and tell the wolves to come.
Oh, and he doesn't show up at conferences alongside
Correct.
wolves as
Correct.
well.
Correct.
So.
Well, that, I think...
I want to actually end with a quote by Charles Spurgeon.
Okay.
And I want to recommend, too, that anybody interested in this topic should look up the downgrade controversy. Charles Spurgeon, toward the end of his life, actually became embroiled in this because at that point, heresy was, and it was heresy. We're talking about denying the atonement, the deity of Christ. They were major doctrines. Biblical infallibility was creeping into the church. And anyway, he took a stand and he said that, we need to stand against this because you had the quote-unquote liberals mixing in with the quote-unquote solid leaders and teachers anyway. So here's what but look into that downgrade controversy. It's fascinating. It's inspiring. I think it has a lot to say about what we should do today in our course of action, just strengthening our spines to stand against this and obey the Bible and come out from among them. So here's what Spurgeon said. Quote, numbers of good brethren in different ways remain in fellowship with those who are undermining the gospel, and they talk of their conduct as though it were a loving course which the Lord will approve of in the day of his appearing. We cannot understand them. The bounden duty of a true believer towards men who profess to be Christians and yet deny the word of the Lord and reject the fundamentals of the gospel is to come out from among them.
Yep. Be that as it may. Well, thank you for spending more time for such a time as this. And look at our name. Our name for such a time as this is taken directly out of the quote when Esther was faced with very difficult times. We believe we are faced with very difficult times. We believe the Church of Jesus Christ is under assault so many ways. And sad to say, they're under assault with shepherds not being the biblical shepherds they should be. And this is a time in which the true shepherds and the true believers of Christ need to take a stand. And if that means we lose some of our church members, if that means we lose some of our friends, then so be it. We are called to be faithful, and this is what we ask all believers to strive for. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor James.
Thank you, Prof. Abby. Thank you, Prof. Chris.
Yep.
We'll
Thank you.
We'll see you once again. God bless.
For such a time as this,